in America, anytime a white person is in charge or whatever, everything seems to be possibly could work or whatever will work because they will work with him or whatever. But this black man, this President Barack Obama, they claim it's his policy. They didn't want him to do nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. He couldn't even turn the lights on in the White House if they would have had to say so. They just said, don't turn them on. I'll cut the power off. Anyway, let's go to with Nancy McLean's Democracy in Chains presentation at Madison University. It runs about 46 minutes. Stay with us here on howcee-talk-music Blog Talk Radio as we seek to push some buttons.
Nancy McLean. It's my distinct honor to introduce Nancy McLean. She's Professor of History and Public Policy at Duke University. She did her graduate work right here at UW-Madison. She's a historian of social movement. Her books include Freedom is Not Enough, The Opening of the American Workplace. Another one is The American Women's Movement, 1945 to 2000. There's Behind the Mask of Chivalry, The Making of the Second Ku Klux Klan. And the reason we brought her here today, she's the author of the eye-opening and profoundly disturbing book, Democracy in Chains, The Deep History of the Radical Right's Stealth Plan for America. It is just a kind of a shocking book. I think it's one of the most important books of the last decade, one of the most urgent books. She was a finalist, or the book was a finalist for the National Book Award last year. She won the 2017 Lannan Foundation Cultural Freedom Award for Democracy in Chains. You can buy the book here, and she'll sign it afterwards, thanks to rule of one's own. I give you Nancy McLean.
Back in Madison. I came here with my husband who's out there somewhere, and we've just been having a wonderful few days here. Every place we go by, I seem to have a new memory of some great thing that went on and some person who did something or some story. So anyway, it is really, really good to be here. And I have to tell you, too, I was never more proud to have been a Badger than in 2011 when you all stood up so magnificently to defend public sector workers' right to organize and in defense of our basic democracy. And nobody really understood it then, but you were at the first wave of this, and we were all watching, just so inspired by you, and it is not over yet. What you started is not over yet. So I want to thank Matt Rothschild for inviting me in the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. I also want to give a shout out, I don't even know if they're here, to Eleni Shermer and Joe and Jane Shermer. This is just a beautiful thing. When they saw I was coming back, Eleni had done this really wonderful review of the book, and she's a graduate student here in education at the UW, and they offered to put me up at their place. It was such a great Madison gesture, and as it turns out, it's a block away from the last apartment I had in Wisconsin. So I'm just having a great, old home day, or old home weekend here. So anyway, thanks. And it was just this kind of circle of solidarity that's so Madison, and it really felt good to have that. So I'm really thrilled to be here with the Democracy Campaign and with people who have been thinking long and hard about these crucial issues that are before us. And I'm excited to be in conversation with you and in dialogue tonight about my research for this book and the light it sheds on what's happening in our country and what that means for organizations such as yourselves who are trying to fight this, trying to reclaim democracy, and what that means for strategy going forward. So I'll speak for about 20 minutes, I think, about 20, 25 minutes, maybe to set up the conversation, but I want to save most of the time for talking together. I think some of you maybe here have read the book. Yeah? Oh, okay, yeah. Because I was also here in the fall and had a wonderful evening at the Labor Temple, and some folks were there. And I just think for a group like you, I don't want to get into the weeds. I have to say I think it's an interesting story. It's a story that started, I had never heard of the two people who loom large in this book when I started out on the research in 2006. One of them is the first Nobel Prize-winning economist from the U.S. South, a man named James McGill Buchanan, who started something called the Virginia School of Political Economy, and the other is, of course, Charles Koch. And I was not looking for them. What I was tracing was the shutdown of public schools for 5 years in the county of Prince Edward County, Virginia, to punish the black students there for having gone on a 100% solid student strike in 1951 and launched one of the cases that fed into Brown versus Board of Education. And the county officials in Prince Edward answered the call to desegregate without further delay by, as they put it, going out of the public school business entirely. So they completely shut down the public school system. They posted no trespassing signs. They padlocked the school, and they left black children with no formal education whatsoever for 5 years as their white counterparts went off to private segregation academies with tax dollars. And this astonished me and moved me when I learned about it in the archives. But what also intrigued me was I found that the entire libertarian movement of the time rallied to the side of the state of Virginia with these tuition grants and this push for private schooling beyond the reach of the federal courts. So I started researching that story, long story about how it led me to James Buchanan and Charles Koch, but it was a lot of serendipity along the way. But I will say this about that late 1950s crucible of the Koch rights project that I found in Massive Resistance to Brown versus Board of Education, that Maya Angelou was right when she said this: when people show you who they are, believe them. So, we won't go into that story because I want to emphasize instead what I see as the value added of my historical research for those who are seeking to defend and expand democracy today. And the import also, I want to emphasize also the import of that research for anyone who has been puzzled by how progressives could have attracted majority support on issue after issue after issue and won local campaigns again and again and again, only to see economic inequality grow and find ourselves losing power pretty steadily as the right has come to dominate now 30 states and every branch of national government. So my book speaks to this question of how did this happen? How did the high hopes of 2008, to take one illustration, and some of us do remember those dimly, but how did those high hopes give way to this? And a public health nurse who read the book, I thought, captured this well when she said, she made the analogy that you need to get the diagnosis right before you can determine the correct treatment plan. And so I think the book tries to provide that kind of diagnosis that can inform a good treatment plan. And I'll state my case plainly, which is that the right has been winning, I believe, because the Koch donor network has very effectively weaponized the ideas of this figure, James McGill Buchanan, and the school of thought he launched, public choice economics, to, in effect, reverse engineer the 20th century liberal state. Above all, by undermining the collective power on which progressive advance depends, and then by rigging the rules in its favor at every step, as you have witnessed in Wisconsin. I don't think I need to review that. But I'll say that where journalists, above all the brilliant Jane Mayer, have done a terrific job of exposing the Koch money trail, of where this dark money comes from, where it's going, what it's funding, and so forth, I happen, again through serendipity, on the source of the ideas that have lately made that money so devastatingly effective. And Charles Koch himself actually boasted at their most recent donor summit that he said, "We have made more progress in the last 5 years than I was able to make in the previous 50. And I believe the reason they have made that progress is because of weaponizing these ideas in ways I'll describe as I go along. But by following the trail of the ideas that the Koch donor network has weaponized, a trail that began not with the election of Barack Obama, and I think this is very important, but decades before, I think we gained several important resources for the kind of work that you're all doing as we go forward. First, I think we gain a deep understanding of the operational strategy of this right, including how that strategy might be blunted. Second, we gain a story that exposes how they are using the means they are precisely because they know that the majority will want to stop their plan if alerted to it. And third, we gain a knowledge of their real endgame, which is an incredibly radical transformation of our society and government, one that would in time force total personal responsibility by undercutting our ability to do the kinds of things that citizens have done together over the course of the 20th century, from regulating corporate pollution and consumer fraud to building up workers' rights, to creating social insurance systems, to action against discrimination. All of these kinds of things would be undermined by what this right is trying to, the rules changes it's trying to affect in our democracy. So in short, this Koch donor network seeks to, as I put it, following Buchanan's own language, they seek to enchain democracy. The plan is to bind our political process in such a way as to make our institutions unable to comply with the will of the people, at least where it involves significant tax transfers and regulation. And here I think a contrast could be helpful for thinking about the way that they have been working. Where the left, for years, has been issue-oriented, working in silos, so I was glad to hear you guys are getting out of the silos, working in silos and focusing on short-term campaigns, this Koch-led right has played a very patient long game, one that is aimed at systematically building the power for overall transformation. And they are determined to use this power to rig the rules so as to win across the board through a series of changes that are interrelated and mutually reinforcing. Charles Koch himself has described this project by analogy as stonemasonry. And he said the skilled stonemason takes a great deal of care in choosing the first stone and setting that stone. And then that stone opens up the space for another, and then, et cetera, et cetera. And you can think in Wisconsin, Scott Walker, 2011, that was the first stone when he said we dropped the bomb. That opened the way. But they're thinking in these very strategic terms. So what we're seeing then is not about one sector or a policy direction or even a bunch of issues added up, and it is far more than partisan. It is an audacious plan that has been decades in the making to fundamentally change the relationship between the government and the people, and to do so permanently, without ever having to win the agreement of voters to the project. To grasp why having this plan of action matters, let me quote the head of Koch Industries' Government and Public Affairs Operation, a man named Mark Holden, floating to an invitation-only summit of billionaire and multimillionaire donors in late 2015. He said, and I quote, "We're close to winning. They," he was referring to critics of the Koch network, but he might have been referring to the rest of the citizenry, "they don't have the real path. They don't have the real path." I believe that I found that real path through my research, and again, by serendipity, following this other story, but sort of seeing where it led. And the path starts with gaining control over an ever-growing number of states, again, 30 at this point. And then it moves through those state legislatures as the Koch's elected allies alter the rules of the political game as they go. Among the pivotal changes that they push through are these things that Matt was referring to. Radical redistricting to enable effectively minority rule, right, to let these legislators choose their voters rather than voters their legislators. Destroying the shop floor power and get out the vote capacity of labor unions, especially public sector labor unions, which are the most powerful, progressive, and politically active unions left in today's America. Undermining other strong liberal lobbies, such as Planned Parenthood and trial lawyers. And then, with these core power bases weakened, the strategy moves on to setting the next stones, such as voter suppression, preemption of local victories, whether on living wages, discrimination, environmental protection, what have you, undermining action on the environment, privatization of public resources, and privatization for strategic reasons we need to understand, not for efficiency or quality, but ultimately because they know, and they've talked about this in their strategic documents, they know that they can use privatization to weaken the defenders of liberal government while expanding corporate interest in lobbying to keep what they're gaining through that process. And also, most recently, attempts to undermine the independence of state judiciaries. as you've seen here and we've seen in North Carolina and others are seeing as well. Okay, so where does this path end then? I believe it ends in the ultimate rules transformation, our national rule book, the U.S. Constitution. This Koch